goal was to shoot it so that the head, the eye, the bill are all sharp, which this one is, and then I just wanted it to melt away after that.
Once I kind of saw how they were flying in the areas they were flying through, I was able to change my position to take advantage of it.
All right, welcome to the show. Today it's a special show. I'm doing a show today on the 3 keys of bird photography. And honestly, they're very simple concepts. But I wanted to start with a story of how I got started. I don't know if everybody really knows how I got into birds. I get asked a lot about that. So this is the black and white warbler. This is called my spark bird. So this is the first bird picture, honestly, that I ever took. And it was taken with a kit lens at the time I had purchased to photograph my sons playing soccer. And I took him up to Hawk Mountain, which is a local spot. And we went to view hawks in the middle of June, which is, by the way, the worst month of the year. But I knew nothing about birds at all. But I thought it would be a neat place to hike and take my kids out. So we went up there with the camera. And we didn't see any birds. And I was getting a little depressed because there was no hawks. I think we saw a turkey vulture or two. The neat thing is, right as we were leaving, I saw this little guy, and he hopped up on a branch in front of me. I took this probably with a 200 millimeter lens, and was fascinated by the bird. And I went home and I researched and I tried to study and figure out what these were. Realized it was a warbler. Found out there were over 30 species of warblers that come through the state. Had never seen one in my life, and just went all in. I mean, I started to not just learn about birds, but also tried to learn more about photography and started really getting into it. And this was back in 2013. As the years went on, the same species I photographed pretty regularly have turned into images like this. And when I thought about the difference between what I used to do in the beginning and what I try to do now, and when people said, "Hey, what tips do you have for me? Like, what are the key points on this?" It really came down to 3 things. And the 3 things that I tried to apply to every photograph were light, perspective, and environment. And what I'm going to do in this slideshow is just take you through about 150 images. We're going to move pretty quick on some of this. Light's going to take up a lot of time. And that's where I'm going to start. And when I do critiques or when people ask me about their images, almost invariably the first thing I say is, let's talk about the light. Was it good? Was it bad? Did you use it appropriately? So I'm going to start with golden hour. And, golden hour is that peak time where every species looks good. And I'm going to show you all 4. I break down species into 4 categories. I break them down into shorebirds, raptors, songbirds, and waterfowl. And I'm going to take you through golden hour with all 4 of those species and give you some visualizations. I started with shorebirds, though, because the one thing about shorebirds is they just look great. To me, if I can pick any light to photograph shorebirds in, it's almost always going to be golden hour. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is they're not always the most brightly colored birds. You don't see a whole lot of yellow, bright, vibrant shorebirds like you might with warblers. So number one, the golden light is going to catch them and kind of accentuate some of maybe their more muted colors, but also the environments that they're in tend to have shallow pools, beach scenes. You may get some nice pretty backdrops, but that golden hour light is really going to accentuate all of that. So it's not just the species that I'm looking for when we talk about golden hour, it's also what is it doing to the environment, and we'll get to that a little bit later. These wading birds really take off and look great. One of the other things that's nice about golden hour is just finding the species. With warblers or raptors, you can't always predict where they're going to be and when they're going to be there. Shorebirds can sometimes be a little bit more predictable. So something like this oyster catcher, if I see them on the beach and it's 2 hours before sunset, I have a very good chance of knowing that they're going to hang around in that area, and it gives me a lot of time to set up and prepare and put myself into position to find them. If I'm doing it at sunrise, I might have to get there very early to kind of scope out the area. So, golden hour shorebirds works every time. And the other thing that I really like, the other species or type of species that I really like is waterfowl. And again, it has to do a little bit with the water itself. Sometimes you're going to get really pretty colors. I have some examples at the end of some really gorgeous colors that show up in the water. But waterfowl, they just look stunning in golden hour. And in fact, everything looks good in golden hour. The thing about it is it's really not an hour. You're talking probably more like 30 minutes at best. Sometimes it's 20 minutes. Maybe you get lucky and it's 45 minutes, depending on where you live and time of year. But everything looks good in golden hour. There's just not much of it. So you really have to take advantage of it and have a plan to use it. This is a cinnamon teal that I took down in Arizona. It's the only time I photographed cinnamon teal. I'm really looking forward to getting these this year in Arizona again. This is a bufflehead, and you can see the iridescence starting to show here. This is a little bit more direct light, a little bit before golden hour probably, but still has some of that quality to it. And then this is a flying pintail that my friend Theo, who's actually in the chat, and I shot up in Alaska this past year. And as you can see, all of these species, all of these birds, they just look terrific in golden hour. And it's not limited to just shorebirds and ducks. We talked about everything looking good, but we also talked about the challenges of how difficult raptors can be in general. So finding a raptor and then having them be active during that golden hour period can be a challenge. Over the years, I've managed a few that I really liked. This is one just as sun was setting, so it's shot from the back. The light's actually coming from the other side, but you can see those nice golden tones. And then this one was right at sunrise. Finding a perched raptor at sunrise is always gonna work out well. It's just a huge challenge. If you have a predictable bird, or they tend to like the same perches or hunt in the same area. So if you know an area that they're going to be, I think this one hung out in this area for quite a while. And then finally, songbirds. And what do they look like at golden hour? Well, they look great. So I definitely would love to shoot songbirds more at golden hour. Again, the problem with songbirds is they're very mobile, and they're going to be tougher to get out in the open where you can get this great light on them. Tending to be more in the forests or in trees, you're going to have a tougher time getting them out into open, but there are definitely some species that will work better than others. And this one's actually shot with the light coming from the backside, but this was right at sunrise, so you get those beautiful colors. You can see it on the branch down here and a little bit up here. Another black and white warbler. I did this one actually this year. It's one of my favorite shots of the year, with the golden hour light hitting it from the side. So you get this really dramatic light coming and hitting it from the side. And then these are all front lit. This is a grasshopper sparrow that I shot locally last year, field sparrow. And you can just see the nice pretty colors. That nice golden tone is still here. This is a dickcissel, pretty rare bird for this area, but has been coming back locally the last few years. And I really enjoyed this session, feeding on some wild oat. This is a ruby golden crown kinglet that I got up at the Hawkwatch. And then finally shot this last year, this hummingbird, which landed literally right in front of me. I was watching sunrise come up, and it's one of the very few times I've shot hummingbirds. I don't set up perches and feeders for hummingbirds, so when I shoot them, I'm just shooting them, accidentally as they pass through on migration. But I was lucky enough to get this one right at sunrise, and you can just see again that beautiful golden light. It works on everything, but it's not the only light available. So I want to take you through some other thoughts around light. This is interesting. I'm going to transition here from golden hour and direct sun into overcast light, but in this middle I have a couple slides to show you what can happen in between. So this is actually a mist covered morning with direct sunlight, but it's so filtered that the light was crazy. So I have some blue tones in here as well as some golden tones hitting the duck itself. And here's a close-up of the same duck, same day, with that mixed filtered light. And then one more here, same day, different species. This is a black-bellied whistling duck down in Texas. But again, you just see that really interesting transitional light that's got some filtered sun coming through, but not those really strong golden tones. So there's all these other pastel tones that come through. So that's really super interesting as well. I'm going to skip over. I've got a couple slides in here that talk about blue hour. Not something I want to spend a lot of time on today just because of time, but just know that there is this other set of indirect light. So before the sun rises that you can take advantage of. You'll actually get some of the most interesting color. And I highlighted this because I wanted to show you the pinks and oranges and sometimes the blues and purples that will pop in this. You don't see it as much here, but you could start to see it here as the sun was starting to just touch the clouds, but hadn't come over the horizon yet. And I have one more, I think, here. Yeah, this is just the sun hasn't come up over the horizon yet, but you could start to see those pinks and blues. So it's something I just wanted to show because that blue hour light will often give you much different images than other people are posting. Not a lot of people will shoot or stay past sunset or get ready to shoot before sunrise. And when you do, you'll get these colors that are very unusual. I've got one at the end. At the end of the presentation, I have about 10 or 15 slides of my favorite images. And I've got one in there that really illustrates how different you can get the light to look. And again, it's very unique. So not a lot of people are going to be able to show those colors the same way. And as we transition out of this direct light and this golden hour light, we get into overcast. I'm going to start with songbirds because just like I started with shorebirds for golden hour, songbirds are my preference for overcast light. And there's a few reasons for that. One is it's going to eliminate shadows that tend to happen when you're in these sticky, woody environments. So instantly you get rid of shadow. Not instantly, but you eliminate most of the shadow. The second thing is it gives you a lot longer ability to shoot. Since I don't like to shoot in hard, direct light, shooting in overcast conditions will allow me to shoot sometimes for 3 or 4 hours in the morning while these songbirds are still active. So it's something that I really try to take advantage of, and it's a big principle I have for songbirds. So all of these images that I'm going to show you were captured in overcast conditions. This is a cerulean warbler, little kinglet. This one was actually on a completely foggy and misty day, so completely overcast light. The settings on this, I'll just read off some of these settings. This was down at 1/500th of a second at ISO 1600, and that was at f4. So you can definitely see that there's not a lot of light. And that really is the disadvantage with shooting these overcast conditions, is it does put a little bit more strain on your gear. So if you've got the larger apertures, the f2.8s or the f4 lenses, it's definitely a huge aid for shooting in these overcast conditions, because a lot of people are limited to 5.6 or f3 or 6.3. They tend to not be comfortable shooting overcast because it puts a lot of strain on the body to go up to like ISO 1600 or 3200, and they're not pleased with the grain that comes out on the other end. So I totally get it, and there's definitely a huge advantage. It's one of the reasons that I purchased a 400 2.8 lens instead of purchasing a 600 f4 lens, is because I wanted that extra stop of light, knowing that a tremendous amount of the stuff that I do is overcast. So red-eyed vireo here. This was overcast as well. This is a golden winged warbler from Pennsylvania, and this gorgeous Lawrence's warbler that this is like a bird of a lifetime, and I'll have to thank a good friend that's on the chat for this one, because this one was a super, it's just a super rare bird, and I was super fortunate to be able to photograph it at this range. We were shooting this, 10 feet it would land sometimes, 20 feet, 30 feet. So really, really fortunate to shoot that one. And you can see the backgrounds here, super clean. You'll see, we're going to talk about backgrounds in a little bit, but you'll see a difference in some of these backgrounds when we're going through shorebirds, or songbirds rather. And then as opposed to this one, which was a very patterned background. I actually shot this with my good friend Mark Stroll, who's on the call. And we had a good time in the pouring rain, I think, for that one. Blackburnian warbler, one of the most beautiful warblers that breeds here in Pennsylvania. Black-throated green, one of the most common warblers that I photograph, local, to have a big patch of them north of here. Chestnut-sided warbler. And again, the theme here is just that this overcast light can be very pleasing. It eliminates those shadows. And if there's enough of it, I don't like to shoot in complete darkness. I'm not talking about these thick storm clouds. That's really going to kill you. But you get that hazy, overcast light. Sometimes the sun is just getting filtered through. I have this thing about if I can look at the sun and not burn my retina, it's probably the right amount of light. So if I can see the sun, the shape of the sun through the clouds, then I know I'm getting some light down to the subject. All right. This one also shot in shade with a really interesting effect. I'll show you this effect again at the end. The bird here is in shade, the background is getting sunlight, and it creates this really bright, vibrant background, but doesn't have any shadows. I guess you could see a little shadow here, but it doesn't have those strong shadows that you would get with more direct light. And then waterfowl work as well. So waterfowl don't have to be in golden hour. I'm going to show you a few examples of overcast light. This was a completely overcast day. You could see that the water took on this very ethereal quality. It almost looks like it's floating in clouds. So you'll get that effect. This golden eye, which is, again, pretty hard to get around here. I was very fortunate to get a nice look at this bird. But you can see the very soft colors now. You don't have that direct light. This is a merganser in very overcast conditions. And this is a common loon that I liked. I'm going to show you the difference side by side between what this loon looked like in overcast light, which again was pleasing. There's nothing wrong with this, versus what it looked like in golden hour. And the difference, just look at the eye. You're going to see, you could really see the color in the eye when that sun is hitting it in golden hour versus this overcast look. So again, it's not wrong. One might not be better or worse than the other, but it does definitely give you a different feel for the final product. And then the last type of light I want to talk about is, you'll hear us, refer to this type of light as hard light or direct light or strong light, sometimes even harsh light. It's not that there's not a place for it. It's just that it tends to not work very well for portraits, but there are definitely some applications for it. So looking at this egret that I photographed a couple years ago, you could see that everything is frozen. So you could see the water's frozen, the action at the bill is frozen, the little minnow is there, he's frozen. So everything is captured very well. And when you're shooting with more direct light, it allows you to shoot at much faster shutter speeds. So I'm guessing, I'm guessing this is at least 5,000ths of a second with ISO at 400. So it just allows you to get these really clean images. You're not going to get a lot of noise in the image. So, and again, that's why it tends to be appealing for people when they're starting off. But when you do a lot of portraits of songbirds or whatever it is, and you've got that strong direct light with shadows, it really is unflattering. I didn't pull up any images of what bad light looks like. I'd like to think I don't have too many in my recent catalog, but if I go back a few years, I have tons. And it's just an incredible difference when you're looking especially at those portraits. This was another time that I was out shooting towards sunset. We were scouting an area for birds, and we kind of found what we wanted, but the light wasn't great. So instead of just doing nothing for an hour till the light got good, decided to just jack up the shutter speed and wait for these little sanderlings to do something funny. So in this case, it's kind of doing that little Michael Jackson pose. He was just jumping up and down, but right as he was landing, his toes hit the ground like this, and I was able to freeze it in time. With a slower shutter speed, with less light, the same bird would have been moving too much, and I would have gotten motion blur. So again, taking advantage of the stronger light. This is 3200ths of a second, so, just freezing the action there. And the application that I use direct light for, or hard light or strong light for the most, is with raptors. It just allows me to capture flight shots at a much faster shutter speed. So you're able to freeze that action. And while the light might not be great, so you could see that this has a strong shadow here, it actually, on this particular image, I liked because the head was just popping out of the shadow part of the bird. And to me, it kind of put a spotlight on that little eye. You can also see here, we're going to talk on a little bit about backgrounds, but you could start to see the introduction of these clouds in the background. And that's another feature that I liked about this image rather than just a solid background. But again, using that stronger light to freeze action. This bird coming right at a decoy owl. I'm at 4,000th of a second on this one. There's, at a slower shutter speed, even 1,000th of a second, which is kind of an in-between shutter speed. It's not super fast, but it's not real slow. Even at 1,000th of a second, there's no way to capture this bird moving as fast as it is. I think these sharpshins can probably travel somewhere between 40 and 80 miles an hour. If it's in a stoop, it could probably even get up faster than that. I mean, they can really take off. So if I'm out there and it's first light, and even if it's that first pretty golden hour light, and my shutter speed's at 500th of a second, and this bird's coming in, I just can't get it. The eyes are going to be blurry. There's no way to get that. And normally I don't care about wingtip blur in my photos, but I am concerned with what those eyes look like. So by using that direct light and that hard, stronger light, I'm able to just increase my shutter speed for these raptors in flight. Here's another one, again, sharp-shinned. Most commonly photographed bird that I have in this area, because they tend to travel and they come in groups, but they also are very curious, so they'll come by the hawk watch. This one was shot at 2,500th of a second, and this was a red-shouldered hawk recently from California. Same principle applies. This was well after golden hour. The sun was out. It was pretty direct light, and able to freeze them. This was really close range. I actually think I shot this with a 300 millimeter lens. It gives you an idea of how close this bird was. Very little crop on this. So one of my favorite images of this year, probably one of my favorite experiences of this year, was photographing this bird, just because of the proximity and how comfortable he was with me. I was 10, 20 feet away. He actually flew toward me a couple times. I kept backing up and waiting for him to fly again. It was a pretty cool experience. And not always raptors. This is a scissor-tailed, I gotta watch, sometimes I call them swallow-tailed by accident. This is a scissor-tailed flycatcher down in Texas. Light was strong. I wasn't gonna do anything with portraits, but I was watching these guys hop up and down off wires, and I thought, wow, wouldn't this be great to try to get a really interesting, I was hoping to get him with a bug, but a really interesting pose, because they do these dances. They actually have very long tails. This one does not, but some of the males will have these extremely long tails, so the same image with the tail even longer would have been my ideal image, but just to give you an idea of how you can just freeze that action. This was taking advantage of a side light, so using that really direct light, hitting it from one side, exposing for the whites, and then letting everything else go black. I'm not going to go into detail on this particular image, but I did want to show you other applications for stronger light, and this side light to create some drama is certainly one of those. And then there's these, I'll call this dappled light, or these spotlights that naturally can occur in the forest. You kind of have to get lucky that they land in them, but I really liked this one. Even though the shade is hitting right above his eye and there's some shadow down here, I liked this. So I know, at first when I looked at this, I was like, I don't like that shade on him, but then I started to think it highlights that eye so well, and everything else, I kind of burned a little bit of this down, but it just came out so nicely. I really do like this. This has some nice golden tone as well. It's not, I wouldn't say this is purely direct light, but this one is. Same kind of effect where this oven bird was just in a little sliver of light, and that stronger light created drama, because by exposing for the white of the bird, everything else got really dark. I accentuated that darkness in the edit, so I kind of burned the sides down, but it actually naturally occurred like this, and then I just accentuated and played it up. So another interesting way to use direct light in the forest. Again, you have to get really lucky that they land in it, but when it works, it can work really well. And then just some different use of light. I'm going to show you a few silhouettes and backlight. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I just wanted to show how light can be used in different ways. So even though the light at golden hour can be shot frontlit, it can also be shot backlit. And so here's a series of images. This was a blue hour shot right before sunrise, and then this is right at sunrise. This was a loon. You can see the sun has not come up yet. It's just below the horizon. I think this was shot with a pretty short focal length as well. And then this Dunlin was shot at sunset, playing up the light in the background. And that's the concept of light. That's the types of light that you could use, some different applications for it, but it is absolutely one of the fundamentals, if not the most important thing I think about when we shoot photography. At the end of the day, as a photographer, really all you're capturing is the way light interacts with its environment and the subjects that you're shooting. That's it. So if you start with that as a premise, if you really believe that everything you do is just how you capture light, I think it makes you pay more attention to the light that you're using and how you're using it. Also knowing that there's really not any one perfect light, but there's a lot of different ways to use it. So I think most people would consider golden hour to be the best light, and certainly it has a lot of appeal to it, but there are other ways to use light. So we're going to transition from that into the second fundamental, or the second key, which is perspective. I don't have a lot of examples of perspective because honestly, every slide in here probably illustrates the point. So I'm going to make the point and then show you a few images that best or help to best illustrate that. The thing about perspective that is so challenging when you talk about birds is that they have wings. And if you think about this, if I was talking to a street photographer or maybe somebody that shot models for a living, I doubt that one of their three fundamentals, if I asked them for their three fundamentals, I doubt one would be perspective. Because if you're shooting a model, you're already at eye level. There's very little for you to do. You might get a stool to get a different angle or a step ladder to get a little higher, but you're really not changing your perspective or thinking about how you're going to approach perspective every day. If you're shooting mammals, it may not be a huge part of your concern because an elk or a moose is almost always at eye level. Now they may be up on a hill or down in a valley, but you don't have to plan your day necessarily around it. When I shoot shorebirds, they're probably the easiest to illustrate perspective and the easiest to plan for because while they have wings, they're typically on the ground. So I'm going to show you a few shorebirds here. And when I'm shooting these, the focus on perspective is just about getting at eye level. And to do that, you have to get low. By the way, I really love that this breaking wave creates this plane right here on the bottom third of the image and breaks this up. So I thought that was a good illustration of perspective. And what perspective is doing in these images is it's actually just creating engagement. It's making you feel like you're part of their environment and it's drawing you into the world. And so when people see it, it feels more compelling. The other thing that will set you apart from other photographers, especially with birds, is that when you can consistently get eye level shots, your stuff will look better and you'll start to see people that take belly shots of birds over their head because that's all they can get, and your work will start to separate itself from that. So these shorebirds really illustrate how connected you can feel when you're shooting at eye level. And by the way, the light on this one's pretty good too. These last couple, I shot both of these with Ray Hennessy, and they were shot, that one and this one were both shot in floating blinds. Neat thing about this one with perspective is when you're only a few inches over the water, neat things happen. So if I was shooting down on this from, for the sake of perspective, these minnows, which you could actually see popping out of the water, you might still be able to see them, but the effect wouldn't be as dramatic because you'd be shooting down at an angle. And then this area, this little gap underneath here, this 4 or 6 inches that he's skimming the surface, you wouldn't see it because you'd be shooting down. So here you're actually seeing completely through the bird because of that ultra low perspective. And when you're shooting waterfowl and you're getting that perspective, here you're getting some really neat engagement. And it just looks so cool. I will tell you, waterfowl are really challenging because it means that you've got to be in the water or on the shoreline. So the perspective here is really engaging. And there's some advantages to these low perspectives that I'll cover in a minute. But it's also very, very difficult. Raptors, exceptionally difficult when we talk about getting eye level. Because they fly, you've got to find a way to get in the air with them. So using a hill or a mountain or a lookout is ideal unless you've got low flying birds like harriers, or there's other species that might fly a little bit low. Some of the owls hunt low and you might be able to get that. But if you're going to get some flying raptors, again, separating yourself from others, this puts you at their level where most people are going to be shooting flying birds over their head. When you can create this elevation and get on the same plane as them, it puts you at an advantage, and you're going to get a look that other people just can't get. So again, one of my favorite subjects to shoot are these sharp-shinned hawks. And then here's an eagle that we captured, again lower, so that we're seeing all the way through to the background. And it just provides a really interesting perspective. You're seeing the whole fish underneath. And this one was also shot at golden hour. Perch raptors, you know, again, you could get lucky and just kind of find them hanging around. They typically like the same areas. But this perch raptor I shot out in Utah, was one of my favorites because he not only did he hunt right in front of us and feed. If I zoomed in, you'd be able to see a little bit of stuff on his beak from his meal. But as he perched eye level, it was, again, you just get these engaging images that not a lot of other people will be able to capture because often raptors or other birds are going to be perched overhead. I'm just taking a look at the comments. I haven't been able to to read the comments because normally I have a guest on the show. Let me go back real quick. The rail was a clapper rail, this one. By far my favorite clapper rail image. This was right at sunrise, and the greens in the water, I'm assuming because this is a tidal pool and there's a lot of grass around here, it just grabbed a lot of that green color and brought it into the water. So I absolutely love this. This was such a special moment to see a clapper rail come out of the marsh grass, being totally concealed, feeding and drinking right in front of us, and then literally just turning around and walking back into the grass. Probably, I don't know, 40 feet. Pretty good look. And then perspective with songbirds, and this will be kind of the last species I'll cover when we talk about perspective. And perspective with songbirds is actually probably the most difficult to achieve because you know shorebirds are going to be on the ground. You pretty much know waterfowl are going to be in the water. The raptors and the songbirds become a bigger challenge. Raptors, I will tell you, probably the hardest in terms of perspective. You just don't get as many looks at raptors as you will with songbirds if you're in a good area. But I wanted to illustrate the point about perspective a couple ways. So this first one is a Vesper sparrow. It's one of the few times I've photographed them. But I noticed they were jumping up. There was just a couple of these long stems, and so they would be down in the grasses, and every now and then they would jump up onto one of these. So I just got eye level with that perch and waited and waited and waited, and eventually it came back up there. And I was able to get this. What a different look it would have been had I been stayed standing and shooting down on that perch. The background would have been totally different. The background you're seeing here completely melted away because it's probably 2 miles away. It's a very distant field that's behind him that you're seeing. It's not the grasses right near him. If I had the grasses near him, they would have been in focus and probably not nearly as pleasant. So getting this perspective does a couple things. One, I talked about it creates engagement. So you could see the engagement here with this Canada warbler. You know, it's eyeball to eyeball. It's looking right at the camera. And it really is a beautiful image. I love this scene, but I love a lot of scenes like this. The other advantage to perspective, we'll talk about it when we get to environment, is it's also typically going to help with your backgrounds. And I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. But just to finish off with some of the engagement with songbirds, again, eyeball to eyeball, eyeball to eyeball. And then we're going to switch over and talk about the environment. So perspectives, the concept is really the important part. Try to get eye level. There are absolutely times and places for you not to be eye level, that you can intentionally shoot underneath or overhead. I'm not going to show you examples of that because really when I talk about this subject, these 3 keys, these are the basic principles. So I'm trying not to go into the super creative stuff. I'm trying to keep this real basic, with the premise being that if you applied these 3 things to every image you shot, if you had good light, if you had good perspective, and if you had a pleasing environment, every image you took would be legitimate. It may not win awards, because to win awards, it takes something special, and that's the 4th component that I'm really not talking about. And the 4th component is engagement. So these 3 components, that perspective helps build engagement. These are just how to create pretty pictures. A portrait like this that I have up right now, Northern Parula, it's probably not going to win any awards. But it's a pretty image. It's a super clean image of a beautiful bird in pleasing light. Years ago, this is the type of image I wanted all my songbirds to look like. You know, simple perch, clean bird, pretty light, totally bland background, like nothing competing with it. And it's still an image that I am very happy to take. However, I've moved a little bit in the way that I look at things. So I want to show you some of these perches with nice clean, simple backgrounds, but I also want to show you some other things that I like to do as well. It really is up to you what looks best. There are some people that are going to look at this image and say, that's what I want. That's these type of images that I want to create. And there are songbird shooters that will set up perches, use flash, distant backgrounds because they're controlling the perch. I do remind people, I shouldn't say I never set up perches, but if I set up a perch, it's probably existing where I'm at. So in other words, I'm not putting out a holder with a cut branch from my home that I'm taking out somewhere and putting flashes around it. So if I set up a perch, I'm probably just moving something that's already there to a better spot. So maybe a mossy log or something like that wasn't in a good spot, I might just move it a little bit. So perches become important. So part of these environmental shots is the perch itself. Doesn't have to be, but it can be, especially when there's not a lot going on in the background. So an image like this really starts to become less about the subject and more about the perch. So again, the environment starts to balance out or even overwhelm the subject and become more important. These early maple leaves with their red colors and then the monochromatic bird on top of them, golden hour, really pretty image. And the perch really becomes, you can notice the background is not super pleasing. It's distant, there's nothing competing for it, but it's not like gorgeous in terms of color, but the perch is. So now you've got a beautiful subject in good light on that great perch. Another interesting perch with a clean background. This is some emerging, early April here through the end of May. In this area, we tend to get most of our emerging leaves and blossoms. So here I've got that same Lawrence's warbler on a different perch. These pine needles made a really great perch for this prairie warbler. Man, I don't know if you could see this. He's actually holding on down here to the needles, the ends of the needles. And this is the kind of stuff when I get home, it just makes me silly happy. Like, this stuff is just so ridiculously cool that he's grabbing these little tiny needles, not any part of the branch itself, that becomes of interest. This is another one in a different species of pine. He's kind of buried in the pines. This one gives you a real nice sense of scale. So again, the environment really starts to play in here. If this bird was just on a plain simple branch, to me, doesn't have nearly as much interest as these perches that have texture and depth. This northern parula here on this lichen covered branch. This emerging hemlock that's got these little sprouts that are just starting to grow in early summer. A cerulean warbler again on this mossy branch. Shot backlit, so again, not always shooting a subject frontlit. I actually thought this one worked great when it was backlit because it made the little moss glow. I call that rim light. So it added this little rim light to the moss around here. And then you get a little sense of light around the top of his head there. Oh, Bill Lemon asked, how do you feel about the foreground covering part of the bird? You are going to find out in a minute, my friend. So just stick with me and you're going to see a whole series of that. Sometimes the background itself, so we talked about the perches mostly in that first little section of environment. I'm going to focus now on the background. Sometimes the backgrounds themselves can just be so amazing that it really becomes what the image is about. And in this one, this is actually foreground and background. These patterned leaves are imprinted into the background over here. And it really becomes these patterns in the background. And so in the beginning, I showed some of those real clean, sterile backgrounds that I don't mind shooting, by the way. But these backgrounds really started to intrigue me over the last few years. Again, another reason that I went to a 400 2.8 is it allows me the shallowest depth of field that I can get with a fairly long lens. So that 400 2.8 has become my baby. I can put teleconverters on it, or I can just shoot it at 2.8. Most often I do shoot it wide open at 2.8. And there's some disadvantages. I don't want to get into a technical talk right now. Most bird photographers would not shoot at 2.8 because it limits your depth of field on the subject and you won't get the whole bird in focus. I put a high value on the backgrounds. I don't think that bird photography should just be getting a bird in focus. I just don't think, I think there could be more to it than that. So I'll sacrifice a little bit of the detail and I'll sacrifice a little bit of that depth of field to get more pleasing backgrounds. This one's just crazy. This is a goldfinch that I took this year, but to show you, this is kind of the extreme limits of pattern foregrounds and backgrounds. So to answer your question, you'll start to see these foreground elements. This one's actually coming over the bird. I have some better examples of that. And then sometimes it comes together. So sometimes you get the perch and you get the background. And this is the kind of stuff I really dig. I sat on this. Theo came up, and he knows exactly where this was shot. I sat on this perch, or these clusters of perches, for days, waiting for one of them to jump in these bears. I don't know if Theo was with me this day. I had another somebody that I mentor with me that day, I think, and he had left. He went to shoot something else, and he came back 5 minutes later, and I said, yeah, I think I got it finally. So I was really excited. Not only that, but the berries were in water. So here you see a nice pattern background, nice perch as well, and then a beautiful subject. And this shows both the background out of focus and how that can look. And then here's that foreground element that's out of focus and the bird in between. So I really liked this background. Again, this is not everybody's cup of tea. Some people are going to look at this image like, I don't know what this guy's thinking. There's so much going on and it's distracting. And it can be. When sticks are in focus, they're much more distracting. And when there's shadows, it's much more distracting. When I'm using that overcast light here with a shallow depth of field, everything gets real soft. It takes on this painterly effect. And this is not digitally done. These aren't filters. I don't use any type of filter. I don't, blanket replace backgrounds or substitute them. I'll clone out branches sometimes and do that kind of stuff. But this is true to the scene that was captured out of camera. I think I have another one that's very similar in terms of, this one I actually just posted this week. As Theo would say, this one's bonkers because you've got these really great perches. So he's on a really nice perch in focus with the bird. And then the background is just crazy. Like there's all sorts of colors and patterns happening here. Down in the lower right-hand corner, you could see this curled blade of grass. Again, not everybody's cup of tea, but these pops of color in here with all this texture. This rather bland field sparrow, actually, it doesn't really matter. You could put any bird in the world into this scene, and it's probably still going to look really great. Field sparrow, not the most photogenic bird in the world. Put a field sparrow on a stick with a plain background, and I'm probably not going to post it. But do something like this that feels really interesting, and I like that. And again, I think it's a little bit different than what you see all the time, so it's something that I'm proud to kind of differentiate. Moving into a couple other subjects, I'm going to, again, focusing on the backgrounds a little bit more. Autumn's a great time to really accentuate backgrounds. I have a couple here I wanted to show you. This one's from 2 years ago. You could start to see those autumn colors in the background and how great that looks. And then I did one from this year, which just went crazy with the background. This was a huge tree behind this red-tailed hawk. And I moved into a position where I was thinking less about the bird and more about getting as much of that tree in the frame as I could. So I was able to kind of swing around my Jeep. He was nice enough to perch there for a minute, and I was able to change my angle to get this background. So again, this one, to me, it's a pretty bird, but on a plain background, it's just we call it bird on a stick. But with this background, it adds a lot of interest to it. With shorebirds, the backgrounds can be a little bit tougher because if you're shooting these at the beach, you're going to end up with a lot of blue sky. In shallow tidal pools, you can really get some great stuff though. So this is a tidal pool. These marsh grasses are way out of focus on the far side of the shoreline, and you could get these super interesting palettes. Again, not just one color. So this is going from green to yellow to pink, and it's really interesting background there. And then sometimes adding that background, it puts it into a sense of place. So in this time, you know he's at the beach. I picked this, while there are several frames to choose from, all in good light. I picked this frame because I wanted to give the sense that wave in the background was breaking. And the same thing in this next one here, where I waited, or I should say I waited, but I selected this image with this oyster catcher because this wave breaking in the background, I wasn't sure what it was going to look like when I got it out of the camera. It ended up looking like a cloud, and I thought that was really interesting. So I timed the shots, so as he was just staying there as long as he wanted to. Every time a wave broke, I would shoot, and then I went through at the end and tried to pick the wave that I thought, looked the best. I really wasn't sure that I was going to get this effect with it, but I'm very happy with the way that one came out. With raptors, backgrounds can be really tough because a lot of times they're overhead. Low-flying raptors like harriers or short-eared owls are going to give you an opportunity to include a lot of that environment. So it puts them into a sense of place. And here you've got the horizon, but you get a sense of place with this marsh grass below it. again, on just a blue sky, it's a pretty image, but you lose that sense of space and habitat. This is my favorite raptor of all. This is the rough-legged hawk here flying over the mountains. So again, a sense of place. Taken in Utah, it's very appropriate, so you kind of get the feel for where this bird is. It also gives you kind of an icy winter feel when you add that snowy mountain in the background. And then again, sense of place. This is my happy place up at the Hawkwatch, early morning. This is one of those images that I did shoot at slower shutter speed. This was at 1/500th of a second because there wasn't a lot of light. Fortunately, the bird was farther away and kind of soaring in the valley. So with this really interesting mix of fog in the valley in that middle third of the frame, the bottom third is farmland, so that's just regular green. And then the top was that golden glow from the sun just coming up. So it broke up that background and created a really interesting background that actually follows rule of thirds pretty interestingly. And I was able to get away with a slower shutter speed because it was further away. Had he been coming at me really fast, this shot wouldn't have existed. And then with waterfowl, I talked earlier about one of the advantages of shooting waterfowl is that you can include a lot of color in the water itself. So when you get that golden hour and light is bouncing off trees or objects and reflecting into the water, you get some really, really interesting images. So here you could see that little golden trail in the middle of the image here. Here you see this lit up background that's reflecting down into the water here. This is a ring-necked duck. Taking advantage of those autumn colors. Not the most exciting bird, this ruddy duck. Not really close, but I was able to get some of this background in here. And again, that's where the low perspective comes in. At a higher perspective, I'm getting nothing but water. At a lower perspective, I'm catching the far shoreline, and those colors are also reflecting in the water. There's a time and place for perspective to change, but for the most part, getting that low perspective not only creates the engagement, but will often create these much better backgrounds or different backgrounds. This is an interesting one of a hooded merganser looking at some graffiti, and you can see that it's reflected down in here in the water as well. And this is an inclusion of environment. Some people do these urban type shots where they mix birds with wildlife. Not necessarily my thing, but in this case it actually worked out, and I sure liked it. And then somebody had mentioned, how do you feel about things obstructing? So we talked about perches, we talked about background, we talked about the perspective and how it relates to background sometimes. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about foreground and just show you some images that include foreground. There are many people, and I think this is probably the reason the question was asked, there are many people who will look at an image with the subject obscured and just write it off. You enter it in a contest and somebody says, yeah, but it's the bird's is obstructed by a leaf or something like that. I don't care. I think it creates a more interesting image. I think it gives the bird a sense of place. It adds a layer, so now you've got 3 dimensions. You've got this foreground, you've got the sharp subject, and then you've got the out of focus background. So I like images like this quite a bit. Here's another one. This is a Philadelphia Vireo. I took this year. I was so excited. I've never gotten a great one. Light was just really, really soft and pretty. And this works because of the soft light. These images really will not work nearly as well in that really hard direct light. Things are going to start to come, again, you're going to get shadows, you're going to get hot spots, but when it's soft and out of focus, you get these really pretty pastel colors, and the greens and the yellows especially. You'll see some pinks sometime in here. This one also obscured, so maybe not as visible to you on screen, but there's a giant leaf right here. I had the bird out in the open. I actually moved because the light was a little stronger, and I was trying to cut the light with this leaf in front of me. So I actually moved the leaf or this cluster of leaves in front of the lens a little bit, and it obscured it and cut down some of the shadows and the hot spots that were in this image. But this is one I actually intentionally tried to do. He was sitting there for a while, so it allowed me to move and recompose. And I thought, let me try getting these leaves in and see if it worked, and it actually worked really well, I think. Here's another one. A lot of people would look at this and say, yeah, but you've got all this stuff in front. I love it. This is one of my favorite images of the year from up at the Hawkwatch. I really like this soft light. It's got some magenta and pink in it, And again, you don't get this in direct light. You just hard, strong, direct light. You don't get these colors. Another example of foreground. So you'll see here on the lower part of this image on the tail, you've got the tail is obstructed. People might look at this, if I entered this in a contest, and say, man, nope, no good. I look at it and say, yeah, it doesn't bother me one bit. That is personal preference. So there's professional bird photographers who do this for a long time and who have books published who would look at this and say it's not a good image. It really is just a matter of taste. I think the one thing that has helped me over the years is I'm comfortable knowing what I like, and I really don't care if other people like it. So something like this that somebody else might not like, when I look at it, I'm really into a natural feel on the images. I really like things to look like they were there. They were in their habitat, not that I got them to fly over in front of a blank canvas. I've actually seen somebody advertising a workshop, and they were like painting canvases to hang behind the birds. And I thought it just didn't feel right. Like, so you're shooting these in your backyard with canvases hanging down? Listen, the images probably came out beautiful. I mean, you can control the flash, you can control the light, you can jack up your shutter speed, everything's razor sharp. But at the end of the day, it just didn't feel like wildlife. So it's important to me. The process is important to me. And I want my images to feel like wildlife. This one really got some crazy colors going on. This was very filtered. A lot of mist and haze in the air this day. You could see how soft these colors got. I love this image, but again, a lot of people are going to look at this and think it's busy and distracting. But to me, it's a little psychedelic and a little funky, and I like it. Putting birds, again, into context in their environment. Prairie warbler on some blooming mountain laurel. Putting this clapper rail into its environment. So again, it's obstructed. It's got a big leaf hanging over its head, but isn't this a clapper rail? Like, isn't this what a clapper rail is? This is a juvenile. I did a strong edit on this, I won't lie. I burned a lot of this down because these marsh grasses were hitting too much direct light. The light here was a little bit stronger than I had hoped. So I had to kind of post-process this a little bit more and give it this really moody feel. But at the end, I really liked the way this one felt. And again, it feels like that's a clapper rail. That's what it's supposed to do. Barred owl, tons of foreground obstruction here. I liked it. Foreground, I mean, you could see it here. This is all foreground. The only thing really showing is the eyes. So I was shooting with Mark on this one, and we just kind of moved around until we got intentionally some foreground and just the eyes, because I thought it would make a more interesting image. The other thing foreground can do is it can help obscure sticks that are in the background that might be more obvious. So I'll call your attention to this set of sticks behind the bird here and the one that's hanging off of them here. If without that foreground, the environment could feel very sticky. And I don't think most images that have a lot of strong sticks in them that are in focus or brightly lit or have shadow, it just doesn't look real good. Most of the time you're going to want to see these softer colors. So again, it might not be your personal preference, but I did want to highlight it. And then the last thing about the environment that I wanted to highlight is the environment itself. So sometimes, we talk about backgrounds and foregrounds and perches and all that other stuff and how to get color in the background, but the other part sometimes is the actual environment. And so this one is rain. You could see some raindrops still hanging onto these pine needles, but I'll give you a couple more examples that are a little bit more obvious. This is a black-throated blue warbler perched over a valley. This valley below him is probably a mile down. This is one of the highest spots in Pennsylvania. And this guy just popped up on this little stick. It was raining. I was with a client when we shot this, and it was a lot of fun. He was really, really close. We slowed the shutter speeds down to between 100th and a 1/250th of a second, and we were able to get some raindrops on them. This was super slow shutter speed. These raindrops were probably at 100th of a second, and this is an indigo bunting with these really long streaks of rain. You can even see some of them like bouncing off the stick at different angles. Really fun. Another, this is a magnolia warbler with some raindrops coming down. A dickcissel in the rain, so you really get a sense of the environment that they're in, but you also get a sense that there's, something that they're fighting. In this case, he's fighting this rainstorm. That was a pretty good rainstorm too. I shot that one from the car, but that was a pretty good one. Snow works great. If it's not one of those super heavy snowfalls, snow works really, really great. This wood duck in the snow, red-tailed hawk in the snow. This was a damn near blizzard. This Harrier, I saw him and I just kept creeping up and creeping up and creeping up, and he kind of pretty tolerant of me. You can actually see snow right on his brow, right up here. Now I will tell you, shooting in these kinds of conditions, it's tough in terms of detail. Nobody's going to look at this Harrier and say, oh, the detail's great on this bird, but it's really not. Again, it's not about the subject anymore. It's about the total package. And when you look at this, I'm not trying to show off the species anymore. I'm trying to show off the environment and what that day felt like. I want people to look at this and get cold. That's the goal of an image like this. And I think it conveys that with all this environment. So I'm never afraid to try to go out into snow and rain, because I think you separate yourself with your work. And some people aren't going to go out and shoot that stuff. So you're going to create some images out there that other people don't have. One of my favorites is this Harrier flying right over the snow line here. This is an old one. I re-edited this. I should have put the new edit in this presentation, because the new edit of this is a little cleaner. And then this is going to bring me up to my favorite images. So the one thing I want to think about, again, light, perspective, environment. All these next 10 or 15 images I'm going to show you, I think they have all of that. Some of them have another dimension, which is that engagement. And with the engagement, you're just looking for something special. It could be two things interacting in a frame. It could be a special moment. It could be something that's just totally cool. And I will tell you, sometimes the fourth dimension will override the other three. There was a image that comes to mind last year, award-winning image. I saw it all over social media, and it was an eagle. I want to get this right. An eagle, maybe with a bunny and a fox, all three in the air, like the fox is grabbing the bunny, the eagle, I don't know. I don't remember the exact setup, but you looked at it and you're like, that's pretty damn cool. Now, was the light great? Probably not. Was the environment in the background pretty? I don't remember it being that way, but that was the fourth dimension. And again, sometimes that fourth dimension can overpower everything. If you can get everything together, if you can get the light, the perspective, the environment, and the engagement, something that's really captivating, that's what you want to, when you think about entering contests, winning awards, that's the kind of stuff you're looking for. But these are some of my favorite portraits. Absolutely love this one. This was taken a couple years ago, and it's one of my favorite. It may be my favorite snowy egret ever. I just absolutely love the pose, the light, the color. Background's real pretty. This is one of those clean backgrounds. It's a bird I took a couple years ago, but I really loved it. I've always loved this one. I think we put that in our book, our Songbird book. By the way, we still sell that book if anybody wants one. God's sakes, I'm going to get a nice Christmas present. Blurb.com. This one, we talk about a story sometimes and how a title can create the fourth dimension of engagement. You look at this and it's a pretty image, and then I tell you it's called the swing set, and you're like, oh, I get it. That's cool. So this one just has a little bit of cool factor because it really does look like he's sitting on a swing set. Snowy Owl. This one has the environment. This one's got the snow. It's got the perspective. Really overcast, soft light. Always loved this one. Took this one a couple years ago as well, but always loved the light, the way this, and just not even quite obvious, but right there in the background. If it was just the Drake, I would have loved it. Putting that second one back there, I really love that one. And I love these leathery chocolate backgrounds. That's my stuff right there. We talked about engagement. So often parents interacting with chicks, parents interacting with each other, courtship, all of those things can create engagement, but this one's just a little train ride. Love the pose on this one. Maybe my favorite warbler shot of the year. Golden winged warbler. Love this one especially for a couple reasons. One, here's that foreground, right? Covering up the branch. Clean background, soft light, but the pose. We didn't really talk a lot about subject in this. If you think about everything we talked about light, doesn't involve the subject. We talked about perspective. I guess it involves the subject, but it's not really truly talking about the subject itself. We talked about the environment. We never really talked about the subject. And here in this case, the fourth dimension, the pose really adds that extra element of engagement. So loved this pose. She was actually feeding on these leaves up here. So she was bent around the other way. And I don't know if she heard my shutter or if it was just a natural movement for her, but she then swung her head around. She ate the insect up here, swung her head around all the way back, and gave me this just absolutely gorgeous look. And the females are very difficult, very, very difficult to photograph. Engagement again. So this one, you got the parent, you've got the chick. Yeah, really, really nice. I'm getting a little message on my streamer. So somebody just comment if it's still streaming okay. I'm just getting a warning that it's lagging. TL Sepkovic, that was not made in your neck of the woods. That was made in my neck of the woods. We've got a couple spots in Pennsylvania for these golden winged warblers. There's a couple pockets out near State College in the middle of the state. I've got a pocket up here on the east side of the state. Talked about the blue hour. This was after sunset and some of the things that can happen. This is a contest edit, so there's very little manipulation. I probably played around a little bit with color and hue just to accentuate that. But what came out of the camera was pretty close to this. Again, I like a nice title. This one's called Cotton Candy. I look at that color of pink and I just think, man, it looks like you should be eating that thing. In these snow geese, slow shutter, really an image I'm proud of because I visualized it. I waited on that one cloud as the snow geese were taking off. I knew I didn't have much time. If you guys have ever watched this light change from golden hour to blue hour, there's this little transition where you get the clouds to light up, and it does not last long. It could be 5 minutes. So I knew I didn't have much time. I dialed in the shutter I wanted and just tracked these small flocks crossing here and praying that I was panning to get their heads sharp and the wing blur. And many fails. I took hundreds of frames as they went through these clouds, but I came up with a few frames, probably 5 or 6, where I got relatively sharp heads and I got the motion blur I wanted, and I got them right in that sweet spot with the color. So this one I'm really proud of. I do like this one quite a bit. This one's called the Trio. Another image I took this year I'm really proud of. I just like the action, the mood. This was that crazy misty light in the morning. This one I just took last week. It's my favorite image of the fall. I did not get out much. I was really in a rut. I'd been out 3 or 4 times for waterfowl and got nothing. And then I hit this spot. We talked about the backgrounds. This is called Fire Lake. So you could definitely see where the title comes from, but putting that really stark, dark, and I left this edit so that the hooded warbler was real dark here to try to make it stand out. So you get that real great sense of shape. He had the hood up, which I loved for this. And then the strong eye showing that kind of matches this background color. So yeah, that's an image I really, really liked. Made me super happy. I hadn't taken an image in about 7 weeks when I took that. And then I thought, you know what, this is, if you get one good one, that's really all that matters. I'll leave you with this one. This one's called Symmetry. This is a piece that I'm hoping to get into contests this year. Got a lot of good feedback on social media from this one. The symmetry really is pretty incredible with this. I did 2 edits. I have a contest edit that's pretty much out of camera, just cropped with some adjustments. This I'll call this an art edit because I added some of the background down here. I had to blur it out. There was some white lines in here that I didn't like. So just for the art edit, I did this. So if I was going to frame this and hang it, I would probably use this version. The other one's just not as appealing. So anyway, man, that was it. That was my goal was to do it in an hour. I came up at 1 hour and 4 minutes. Hope you enjoyed it. I really don't have anything else. I'm going to say a couple words before I let you guys go. The first is that, again, this was a live show only. Thank you for joining. It really means a lot to me that you took the time out of your day. The second thing is I do archive this on Patreon. I've got some exclusive content there. And every 3 or 4 months, I like to do an episode that just goes to that audience. That is a subscription audience, and since they are paying a monthly subscription, I see a lot of names on here. So I want to thank you guys for your support. Lisa, Terry, I see a bunch of them. Cynthia, thank you guys. Katie, thank you. And it's a great site. So if you have a chance, if you haven't ever checked it out, go on there. The other thing I'd like though is feedback. So if you can send me an email, eskeysimages@gmail.com. Just let me know what your thoughts were on the overall presentation. Again, it's a presentation I would like to replicate. I've booked it, I think 3 or 4 times this year. So if there's content in there that you say, hey, skip over that stuff, I'd appreciate it. So if you have some time to drop me a line, give me some feedback, I would appreciate it. I don't think I have anything else to plug. I plugged my Patreon. I don't think that's it, man. You guys have a great night. The Eagles won tonight, and I'm glad you joined me. Have a good night.